I originally didn't intend to make this video, as I didn't want to pull the pin on this grenade. Still, I thought it was enough to do a whole episode on, and take my time to make sure I'm getting this right. After all, the media made sure to paint the subject of our video as the worst person on earth, casting the guilty judgment on him before his trial even started, something I'm sure the media took from the book of cancel culture. The people he killed were applauded as heroes, never mind the fact that they had a list of crimes longer than I could mention. Lads and chads, I'm Captain Poofers, and we're going to talk about Rittenhouse.
Hey guys, well it was a good trip, and they have questions about the verdict, and the verdict really speaks for itself. As many of you know, I've spent a majority of my career working to make the criminal justice system more equitable, and clearly there's a lot more work to do. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Madam Vice President, people are calling it systemic.
In a typical trial, an insider trading trial, for example, something complex, an honest observer might be able to see both sides of the case, and probably can. But that is not true here, far from it. In fact, it's the opposite. From the very first moments of this trial, it was obvious that Kyle Rittenhouse never should have been indicted in the first place.
Absolutely. We know of at least, 5, 6, 10, 12 other guys that had guns that night that had no problems. They didn't shoot anybody because guess what? Nobody attacked them.
Right.
The only
That's the
reason
difference.
that inanimate piece of metal hanging, pointing down the entire night was ever brought up and aimed at anyone was because of a threat. Period.
Yeah.
And that's your right. You get to defend yourself.
When it's like when the left riots, it's a good thing. It's like fucking Martin Luther King out there. So yeah, good, burn it. Like Hassan's threatening right now. Yeah, burn it, motherfucker. Prove Rittenhouse right. Prove everybody right. Go ahead, burn it down. Burn it down. Kill cops. Kill judges. Do what you got to do. Do what you got to do. Prove it. Prove it. Show me. Show me. This is what it started with BLM to begin with. Burn it to the fucking ground. I don't give a fuck anymore. Oh, January 6th, January 6th. Oh God, I guess my service doesn't count anymore because I'm a big traitor to my country because I don't give a flying fuck about January 6th. Burn it, motherfuckers. Show the country what you are post-Virginia elections.
I'd like to start this topic off on the right foot, and by right foot I mean we're going to be talking about memes, specifically my meme. You see, when I made this meme, I had little to no knowledge of the actual trial itself. I had little to no knowledge on the case itself. And I decided to make this meme anyway, because it was the funniest goddamn thing I've ever seen.
And you've already established that after the shooting, Mr. Rosenbaum never says a word, correct?
Correct.
You don't know, as you sit here today, what Mr. Rosenbaum was thinking, do you?
You mean at the time of the shooting?
Yes. Or at any point in his life. I mean, you have no idea what Mr. Rosenbaum was ever thinking at any point in his life. You have never been inside his head. You never met him before. You don't know.
I've never exchanged words with him, if that's what your question is.
So your interpretation of what he was trying to do or what he was intending to do or anything along those lines is complete guesswork, isn't it?
Well, he said, "Fuck you," and then he reached for the weapon.
Yeah. What is it based on? Absolutely. Nothing. Based. Good God, yo. What is it based on? Absolutely. Nothing. Say it again, yeah. Based. Whoa, 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 based. What is it based on? Absolutely. Nothing. Listen to me. Oh, based.
Memes are defined as an image, video, piece of text, etc., typically humorous in nature, that is copied and spread rapidly by internet users, often with slight variations, or an element of a culture system of behavior passed from one individual to another by imitation or other non-genetic means. In layman's terms, memes are funny. Everyone made a lot of memes regarding this trial, probably more than any trial I've ever seen. It goes to the polarizing nature of the trial at heart. One group thinks and believes wholesale in the media's inaccurate portrayal of Rittenhouse. Another group, after collecting, reviewing the evidence, ignoring what the media sells, believes, and rightly so, of Rittenhouse's innocence. Instead of attacking the media in the traditional sense, we turn to memes instead. These funny 1-2 frame comics that portray the silly nonsense of human behavior. I think that's why I wanted to have a small segment dedicated to memes in my video. I find them hilarious, and I hope you do too. I've done my best to collect some of the funniest stuff, and will be peppering this video throughout with such. It was obvious from the start that the media wasn't going to give Rittenhouse a fair shake. The numerous inaccuracies are transporting a weapon across state lines, being an active shooter, illegally carrying a weapon. He was there as some sort of right-wing vigilante murdering protesters. He killed innocent people, or he fled the scene of the crime. And on it went. The only thing the press was interested in was making him out to be this right-wing boogeyman. The Independent, for example, said that Rittenhouse had killed 3 black men, and this was at the end of the trial. Worst of all was when the Independent was notified of the issue, the only thing that they changed was the story and not the bullet points. This confusion allowed for a number of Brazilian news media outlets to run with the story using the Independent as a source. The point of transporting a weapon across state lines turned out to be false as well, as Kyle Rittenhouse had a friend buy him the weapon and keep it in his possession until coming of age and applying for a FOID card. This point is false because his friend gave him his weapon when he was in Kenosha, hence why the transportation charge was dropped. The news media made a point of Kyle going across state lines. They made it seem as if he was traveling miles and miles away to get to Kenosha. The other point was that he didn't have any logical reason to be there. Never mind the fact that Antioch, where Kyle had lived, was on the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. Or even omitting that same fact of Kenosha being on the border, and the distance between the two is less than an hour away. I know because I live in the area. Kyle Rittenhouse also had family in the area. His mom and a number of cousins lived there. In fact, while being in the area prior to the riots, Kyle was helping clean up graffiti from a local high school. Shortly after, he approached the owners of a car dealership to ask if they needed any help, and they took him up on his offer. Side note, Grosskreutz, one of the men Rittenhouse shot, traveled over 50 miles to get to Kenosha, and as far as I know, had no family, friends, or connections to Kenosha itself. Rittenhouse also had his first aid bag with him and treated a woman who sprained her ankle. There's also video footage of him putting out a trash can that protesters seemed to be pushing towards a gas station. With fleeing the scene of the crime, that was proven to be false, when he told the court that he attempted to give himself up to the police, but they told him to go home, at which time he went home to Antioch, and his mom drove him to the local police station there to turn himself in. We even have video to support this.
He just shot them! Hey, dude right here just shot them! Dude right here just shot all of them down there! That dude just shot them right there! That dude right here! Here!
Injured straight ahead. Someone injured straight ahead.
A few quick myths to knock out. On possession of a legal weapon charge, that was thrown out because of a technicality in Wisconsin's law on barrel length. Rittenhouse was also painted as being part of a militia group. That turned out to be false as well, because they later confirmed he wasn't a part of their militia. Finally, Rittenhouse was said to be part of the Proud Boys, a white nationalist extremist group, because he had the audacity of posing like they do in a picture. This circumstantial evidence led to nowhere, as there's been nothing beyond that to confirm he was part of said group.
Trial was marred by theatrics yesterday when Rittenhouse sobbed while testifying. A move so disingenuous, even Webster's dictionary had to get involved. A very different image than what we saw when he was boldly walking through the streets of Kenosha, a town over 4 hours from his home.
It's no wonder there are memes of Rittenhouse suing the media over this whole debacle. And quite honestly, I hope he does. If anyone deserves to be sued, it should be the news media that portrayed Rittenhouse as some kind of supervillain. It's amazing the amount of video and photo evidence we got from this one case. From drones to iPhones, this shooting has been covered from almost every angle. This was the driving factor to determine if Rittenhouse was in fact shooting in self-defense. Because it's kind of hard to claim otherwise while being on the ground being beaten half to death. Before the shooting, Rosenbaum had threatened Kyle and his group trying to protect the car dealership. The language ranged from your casual "fuck you" to "I'm going to kill you if you're alone." This is what we call in the business foreshadowing. It's a subtle hint that shit is in fact going to go down. Let's start at the beginning. Trying to run away from Rosenbaum, you see him get pinned back by some cars. He turns to see Rosenbaum reach for his gun while cornered. Granted, Rittenhouse chose a bad spot to run towards, but if that's all he's guilty of, then fine. He's guilty of being bad at mazes. I won't fault him for being cornered if only he had taken a right instead of a left. I'll leave the media to stretch Armstrong that logic, but don't expect me to do the same. An interesting point to make is that the media is labeling Rittenhouse as an active shooter. Let's see if Rittenhouse fits the profile by reviewing the first video. A normal active shooter usually walks or strides towards his target. In the video, though, we see the opposite. Rittenhouse is running away, not walking, not aiming his gun and shooting randomly in a crowd. He's running away. That's not something active shooters are known to do. He also only engages and fires his weapon when Rosenbaum is literally on top of him while grabbing the barrel of his rifle. Again, behavior that's not typically associated with a normal active shooter. Now for the second shooting. I've got slow motion video. In it, you can see what's happening in frame by frame. Since we're focused on the active shooter narrative, we need to look at the behavior specific to that of an active shooter. Here we see Rittenhouse seems to trip either by his own feet or a protester pushed him. It's not entirely clear. He gets kicked and hit in the head by a skateboard and has a gun pulled on him. He's at a disadvantage, and he's getting the snot kicked out of him. He only fires when someone attacks him. He doesn't fire when someone doesn't attack him. It's easy to understand and easy to learn. Maybe the lesson here is don't bring a skateboard to a fucking gunfight. Or Jump Kick Man is the luckiest motherfucker on the planet. The only one who survives is Grosskreutz, who at first has his hands up, then pulls the gun down on Rittenhouse. When the gun is pulled down, that's the moment when Rittenhouse shoots. He chose that exact moment. The obvious fight or flight, or in this case, shoot or flight, is clear. The fact that the protesters didn't need to attack him in the first place is very clear, because he was going toward police to surrender. None of them needed to interject. He was running away. He was trying to turn himself in. They escalated the scenario that did not need to be escalated and paid the price when they attacked Rittenhouse. If you think I'm being cold right now, you're right. Based on what I know of these people he shot, and of the fact that stupid person did stupid thing, I will not hold these people in regard as you would a genuine victim. And if that makes me a bad person, then fine. I'm a bad person. While we're at it, let's look at the people Rittenhouse had shot, shall we? Because some of them are very interesting. How interesting, you ask? Well, let's start with Rosenbaum, because trying to make a martyr out of a pedophile makes perfect sense. That's right. Rosenbaum is a kitty diddler. Turns out Rosenbaum was convicted with 11 counts of child molestation and inappropriate sexual activities with children, of which apparently include anal rape, masturbation, oral sex, and showing minors pornography. The victims were 5 boys in ages of 9 to 11 years old. Our boy Rosenbaum was very busy in his now brief young life. But I'm glad people are praising him and making him a hero. It really does speak more about their character. Obviously, he's not really a hero. He attacked without provocation. There's no reason to be heralded as a hero. This hasn't stopped the media, though. Or some very dumb people from making him out to be one, though. It's telling where the true priorities lie with the media. They're willing to make a martyr out of some of the worst people to further their own goals. I want to point out that I'm not trying to paint Rosenbaum as someone who might be a pedophile. If there's any doubt, I'd like to clear that up because apparently there's a paper trail. Here we see this. Interesting hobby for all to see. Rosenbaum was also a bad boy in prison too. Shocker, I know. From assault to assault to assault to assault. Oh wait! Here's a different one. Arson! Holy fuck, yeah, not sorry he got shot. Nah. While working on this video, Tommy C had discovered something about Rosenbaum that I think needs to be shown. It's a possible motive why Rosenbaum was in Kenosha at the time of the riots, and why he was in the hospital shortly before the riots. I'll let the video speak for itself, and I think you should hear it from Tommy C.
I'm going to flip off my disgust for his past crimes for a second, all right? Nobody's saying this in the media, and I pride myself by saying things that nobody's talking about. You haven't heard this very often, but you might know that Mr. Rosenbaum was released from a psychiatric ward that day. What you might not know is this. It was a very serious suicide attempt. And before you say good, think about this, all right? Apparently, it was enough to get locked up for. We just we know from, just years of me talking about, I've been telling you for years, it's almost impossible to get somebody locked up for psychiatric help. It's like you almost have to sign your own paperwork. He goes to his ex-girlfriend's house and begs to stay there because he's got nowhere to go. And she said to him, I can't have you in. Apparently he'd beat her before. But please don't go downtown. And for whatever reason, he decided to join the riots downtown. Has anybody thought for a minute, considering his situation, his life, that this whole thing may have been sparked by some kind of weird suicide by cop?
I'm not sure if Rosenbaum was trying to kill himself or not. I can't ask him. And apparently, it's rather hard to do when you're dead. Though, it would line up with his actions during that evening, which don't really make any sense, as Rittenhouse really didn't try to escalate the situation. There could be other reasons why Rosenbaum acted the way he did, but your guess is as good as mine, honestly. This one makes the most sense, however. Next is Anthony Huber, or Tony Hawk wannabe. Apparently he's an innocent little angel. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. He's actually a fucking degenerate too. He's got a number of assault charges. Granted, beating people more than beating your meat in front of children like Rosenbaum is lower on the I fucking hate you category, but based on the fact that he's charged with strangulation and false imprisonment, I still think he's an asshat. Once again, the media makes him out to be another hero for the cause of justice. Someone who is trying to stop the evil Rittenhouse from killing innocent people. Seriously, do all journalists huff paint or just some of them? We of course have the evidence in the form of convictions. and his lists of crimes are lengthy. Finally, we get to the head hero of the hour, Grosskreutz. He's the guy who aimed his pistol at Rittenhouse as seen here. Fortunately, or unfortunately, however you look at it, he got shot in the arm, ending the shooting. I say fortunately or unfortunately, because as it turns out, he's not much of a fucking saint either. I've got his criminal records too, cause why the fuck not? Seriously, is it any wonder why these three people wanted to try and defund the police? No, CNN, you're right. We really should live in a lawless society. Nothing bad ever happened with that. I mean, it's fiery, and possibly slightly charred, but mostly peaceful. Anyway, for Grosskreutz, he's got assault, burglary, and property damage on his record. Once again, we've got a paper trail of evidence with this event. No, I'm not going to go into depth. This simply goes to his character of the people Rittenhouse shot. With this information, do you think the three people Rittenhouse shot were there as innocent bystanders? Because if you do, may I interest you in a bridge? MSNBC swears by it. For starters, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about here. I want that to be very clear. Every one of my points is based on my own personal observations of the trial itself. I have very little to no knowledge on how case law works, and probably never will. I want to get that out of the way right now because we'll be talking about the trial itself, and there are points to be made in the trial that I want to talk about. Many have and still argue that this shouldn't have gone to trial. I'd agree, as the evidence seemed to be overwhelming. It was clear from the get-go that the prosecution thought that they could either win this case with what they had to go by, or, from what I'm understanding, this was more than likely politically motivated. After all, this case got a lot of attention, all the way up to President himself weighing in on the trial. I wouldn't dare say that it's 100% definite, but looking at it from every angle, I can't say that it wasn't either. Even the vice president talked about being disappointed in the results of the trial. This is where we come to the point about talking about the jury, or specifically one juror in particular. And no, it's not Juror 54. I'm not sure if the rumors around this person can be 100% verifiable, so I'm going to avoid talking about them. Instead, I'm going to talk about the juror that got dismissed. This did in fact happen, as this one juror made an off-color joke about Jacob Blake and was dismissed over it.
Okay, the reason I asked you to calm down was there was I was told that while you were being escorted to the car the other day, that you began to tell a joke about the shooting of Jacob Blake, and I wanted to see if is that accurate or not. It is? Okay. Are you comfortable repeating what the joke was, or do you want to just leave it alone? I'm going to tell you that I spoke about, well, I guess I'll hear from Mr. Did you want to finish what you were saying? I will tell you that I've talked quite a bit about public confidence in the outcome of the trial, and regardless of whether the issue is as grave as you presented it in terms of inner feelings, it is clear that the appearance of bias is present, and it would seriously undermine the outcome of the case. So that in itself would be sufficient cause for discharge, but if you want to expand on that, you're welcome to.
No, Your Honor.
Did you want to say anything, defense?
If number 7's unwilling to repeat it, what it was, I think we're at a disadvantage, and I suppose his unwillingness could be taken in the worst light. So based on the unwillingness at this point, I think it's probably the proper course.
Okay. All right. I think the best thing under the circumstances, I'm going to dismiss you from the jury, sir. And we do thank you for taking the time to come down here. Thank you.
This is because the judge did not want to have a mistrial based on a juror making a political joke. And I can't really argue with that either. I know I wouldn't want to have someone judge me be seen as biased in one way or another. The problem isn't that this person is biased, by the way. They very well might be. We won't ever know for a fact. The problem is the appearance of bias, and as it's being televised, it's probably best to release the juror to avoid future problems. The other issue seemed to be the prosecution not following the rules laid down before trial.
There have been numerous occasions during this trial where they've opened the door. The one time when they're going into Mr. Rosenbaum's prior, the reason he doesn't like guns, and I said something, I whispered in Mr. Krause's ear, it's because of the prior convictions. Please stop, and he did. He knows if you're going to go into something that's been excluded in a pretrial order, you better ask the court, you better get permission. This is ridiculous.
It wasn't excluded, Your Honor.
You know why it was excluded in the first place? Because it was propensity evidence. That is exactly what 90404 is designed to prevent. You're talking about his attitudes. His attitude is he wants to shoot people. Now, I've admitted that kind of evidence in other trials when it's been appropriate. I didn't admit it in this case because, to me, what I've heard in this trial, and by the way, Mr. Richards absolutely correctly points out that just hours ago, I said I had heard nothing in this trial to change any of my rulings. So why?
Testimony, Your Honor.
Pardon me?
That was before the defense testimony.
Don't get brazen with me. You knew very well. You know very well that an attorney can't go into these types of areas when the judge has already ruled without asking outside the presence of the jury to do so. So don't give me that. That's number one.
The argument was that the prosecution was stepping over the line on this issue, since it was already ruled on prior and that the judge had not changed the ruling. The prosecutor could not in no way, shape, or form cross that line. For instance, he could ask questions based on if Kyle was protecting his property, in this case, his gun. At least I hope that's what this means. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so take with what I say with grains of salt.
Number two, this is propensity evidence. I said at the time that I made my ruling, and I'll repeat again now for you, I see no similarity between talking about wishing you had your AR gun, which you don't have, so that you could fire rounds at these thought to be shoplifters, and the incidents in these cases, which are not, there's nothing in your case that suggests the defendant was lying in wait to shoot at somebody or reflecting upon the shooting for a vast amount of time. Every one of the incidents involves matters that involve seconds in time. So I commented at the time, I don't see the similarity, and I don't see the similarity now. You have an incident where he's making comments about some alleged shoplifters versus crimes that involve instantaneous actions, whether premeditated murder or whether self-defense. That's for the jury to decide. But I don't see the similarity. I said it couldn't come in, and it isn't coming in, no matter what you think. Number two, I have to be concerned that with what Mr. Richards has said about the progress of the trial, and when you were I said you were over the line, close to or over the line on commenting on the defendant's pretrial silence, which is a well-known rule. I'm astonished that would have been an issue. So I don't want to have another issue as long as this case continues. Is that clear?
It is.
Thank you. Ask the jury to come back in, please.
I actually had to look this up because I had no idea what we're talking about. So if I'm reading this word for word, well, guess what? I'm reading this word for word. Propensity character evidence is the use of evidence of a person's character or trait of character to prove that he has a propensity to act in a specific manner, and thus that he likely acted in conformity with that propensity at the time of an alleged pretrial wrong. For instance, evidence that a defendant charged with a crime of violence had a reputation for being violent would be propensity character evidence. This is because it would be used to prove his propensity for acting violently and his likely conformity with that propensity at the time the crime was charged. Alternatively, propensity character evidence can be defined more simply as evidence whose probative value depends on alpharism? I don't know what that means. Not sure if I pronounced that correctly, by the way. But based on the examples given, once a criminal, always a criminal, such as evidence that a person on trial for robbery had committed robberies before, i.e. once a robber, always a robber. Or in layman's terms, if Rittenhouse had been an active shooter before, this could be presented against him in trial. Or if Rittenhouse had shot people at random, i.e. he shot Rosenbaum if Rosenbaum was running away from him, that could be used as propensity. Neither was the case here, though, as the only time Rittenhouse used his gun was when he thought his life was in danger. This is based on, of course, previous video footage, pictures, and testimony presented at this trial. The other point of contention was the prosecution commenting on the defendant's pretrial silence, which is a well-known rule, quoting the judge word for word there. This is pretty much what it says. If you're in a serious trial, or any trial for that matter, the one thing you don't want to do is incriminate yourself. Basically, you shut the fuck up until you're questioned in court, or you could, in fact, take the Fifth Amendment on this one as well, since it is your right. Again, I'm not clear on this, so if I'm wrong, well, I did warn you, I'm no fucking lawyer. Now let's talk about the singular moment when Grosskreutz had testified, and it completely unraveled the case for the prosecution.
So, Mr. Grosskreutz, I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 67. That's a photo of you, yes?
Yes.
Okay. That's Mr. Rittenhouse. Now,
I love that he did this before he answered.
is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, correct?
Yes.
Oh, shit. He should have said no. It's pointed off to the side. I was dropping it down.
That's when he fires his gun. Yes?
No.
Sir, look, I don't want to... Does this look like right now your arm is being shot?
That looks like my bicep being vaporized, yes.
Okay. And it's being vaporized as you're pointing your gun directly at him. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so
Wow.
when you
TKO. Victory.
with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
Oh, shit. That's it.
That's it.
Directed
That's
verdict. Directed verdict on all the murder charges. Kyle knows.
Yeah.
Directed verdict on the murder charges.
He just exhaled. Kyle just, he looks like he's going to cry.
How do you not acquit after that? Look at Bigger. Look at Big boy. Oh, big boy. Oh, big boy. No donuts today, buddy.
This was the first nail in the coffin for the trial, as you have Grosskreutz, the key witness, admit that it was only until he pointed his gun at Rittenhouse that he got shot. No other time did Kyle shoot beyond that. He saw the threat, was neutralized, and stopped shooting. This shows extreme restraint from someone who's just 17 years old at the time, and I don't know if I would be able to react the same way myself if placed in a similar situation. The other key witness was Rittenhouse himself, which, I might add, was very well spoken. But please, lads and chads, don't take my word for it. Let's listen to the source, Rittenhouse. Now, very important, this is going to be the highlight of the first shooting, and I want people to pay attention to the details here. It's a rather lengthy video, but I think it's a bit important, and I want you guys to watch it.
Rosenbaum, what happened?
once I got to that car and I stepped forward to put that fire in the Duramax out and Mr. Zeminski stepped towards me, I went to go run back south down Sheridan, and Mr. Rosenbaum was right there at the corner of the Duramax starting to chase me, and that's when I realized the only place I can run with the people around me is straight towards the building of the car source lot number 3.
When you saw Mr. Rosenbaum, that's when you said friendly?
When I heard burn inside, I don't know exactly where I was at in the time for that.
Did Mr. Rosenbaum say anything to you?
No, Mr. Zeminski instructed Mr. Rosenbaum to get him and kill him. That's what I heard.
And you go running what's been referred to the southwest corner of car source?
Yes.
And as you're running in that direction, describe being chased. What was happening?
As I'm running in that southwest direction, Mr. Rosenbaum throws, at the time, I know it's a bag now, but when he threw it at me, with the light, it looked silver and it looked like the chain when he threw it at me. And then I continue, I turn around for about a second while continuing to run, and I point my gun at Mr. Rosenbaum.
Does that stop him from chasing you?
It does not.
Okay. After you turn around and you had your hands up kind of in a low ready position?
Yes.
And you see Mr. Rosenbaum coming at you?
Yes.
And what do you do then?
After he throws the bag and he continues to run, he's gaining speed on me. A gunshot is fired from behind me, directly behind me, and I take a few steps, and that's when I turn around. And as I'm turning around, Mr. Rosenbaum is, I would say, from me to where the judge is, coming at me with his arms out in front of him. I remember his hand on the barrel of my gun.
And why didn't you just keep running?
When I was over there, there were about 100 people surrounding those cars, and there was no space for me to continue to run to.
Okay. And so you turned around?
Yes.
And as you see him lunging at you, what do you do?
I shoot him.
And how many times did you shoot?
I believe 4.
And after you shot him, what did you do?
The people around the cars that were originally there were not there anymore. They moved away, and I ran around to see if I could help Mr. Rosenbaum.
And when you got to Mr. Rosenbaum, what was happening?
Mr. McGinnis he took off his helmet and slammed it on the ground and took off his shirt, and I don't remember what he said. I wasn't focused on that. I was in shock, sort of.
Let me back up a second. Did you know Mr. McGinnis was even around?
I didn't.
Okay. And he says something to you, and what do you do?
I pull out my phone and I call Dominic Black.
And you call Dominic, and what do you say?
I told him I just shot somebody. I had to shoot him.
And what do you do then?
I now know it to be Kelly Zeminski, Joshua Zeminski, and I don't know the other people were screaming, "Get his ass, get his ass, get him, get him, get him."
And based upon that, did you feel as though you were safe to stay where you were at?
I thought the safest option would be to go north down Sheridan to turn myself into the law enforcement down there.
Of course, this is the first shooting. Now he's going to talk about the second shooting. Now pay close attention. Like I said, these are just highlights from the actual trial itself when Rittenhouse testified. These are very important moments that I want people to pay attention to.
Okay. Now, after being struck with Mr. Huber's skateboard, you end up on the ground.
Yes.
You're on the ground. What's the first thing you remember?
As I'm on the ground, there are people around me. I don't recall how many, but I remember moving my rifle in their direction, and they back off besides one person.
Okay. When you noticed people by you, you said you moved your rifle in their direction?
Yes.
Did that individual keep coming?
The last person did.
Okay. The people that stopped, what did you do to them?
Nothing.
Okay. And you're saying the last person in that group continued to come at you?
Yes. Jumps at me with he was wearing boots, I believe, and as he's running at me and jumping, as his boot is making contact with my face, I fired 2 shots at him.
Why did you shoot at him?
I thought if I were to be knocked out, or he would have stomped my face in if I didn't fire.
As a result of being kicked in the face, what happens?
Mr. Huber, immediately after I'm kicked in the face, runs up as I'm sitting up to try to get up and get to the police. I'm on my back, and Mr. Huber runs up. As I'm getting up, he strikes me in the neck with his skateboard a second time.
Then what happened?
He grabs my gun, and I can feel it pulling away from me, and I can feel the strap starting to come off my body.
And what do you do then?
I fire 1 shot.
And after you fire, striking, we now know Mr. Huber, what do you do?
I lower my weapon, and I see Mr. Grosskreutz with his hands up, and as I'm lowering my weapon, I look down, and then Mr. Grosskreutz, he lunges at me with his pistol pointed directly at my head.
Now,
my rifle is down, his hands are up, his pistol is in his hand, and then Mr. Grosskreutz looks at me, and that's when Mr. Grosskreutz brings his arm down like this. Like, his arm is like that with me on the ground, and his pistol is pointed at me, and that's when I shoot him.
How many times did you shoot him?
Once.
This is important because it establishes that Rittenhouse wasn't mindlessly shooting people left and right. Whereas if you had an active shooter, you see someone, you shoot someone. Doesn't matter who. The point I'd also like to make is that based on this testimony, everything we've seen lines up perfectly with what Kyle said. And as such, I really can't poke holes in this. One other thing I'd like to talk about was the fact that Rittenhouse did not dial 911 right away, which, it's a riot. Dialing 911 is about as useful as a glass of water to a drowning person. You could say that Kyle took 2 lives that day, and you're right, he did. He even doesn't dispute that. What is in dispute is that he acted in self-defense, which I've mentioned previously. But based on this testimony lining up with the evidence presented, I don't doubt for a second that it was. After the defense interviewed Kyle, it was time for the prosecution to have their turn. And oh boy, was it interesting.
Everybody that you shot at that night you intended to kill, correct?
I didn't intend to kill them. I intended to stop the people who were attacking me.
By killing them?
I did what I had to do to stop the person who was attacking me.
By killing them?
2 of them passed away, but I stopped the threat from attacking me.
If you wanted to, could have given Dominic Black money to purchase a gun at other locations. Fair?
Didn't cross my mind, but now that you say it, yeah.
Why did you pick or want Dominic Black to buy for you an AR-15 as opposed to a pistol or a shotgun or some other type of rifle?
I cannot legally possess or carry a pistol because I'm not 18 in Wisconsin. I believe it's 18 in Wisconsin for a pistol. But with the rifle, I knew I could possess that rifle. I knew I couldn't buy it, but I knew I could like take it to like the shooting range or possess it. And with shotguns, they didn't have any shotguns in stock. That was my original plan, to get a shotgun for trap shooting. But there weren't any at that Ladysmith store, and I didn't want to go to Walmart and buy one.
So your understanding at that time was that Wisconsin law prohibited you as a 17-year-old from possessing a pistol, but you could have an AR-15?
Yes.
What was that understanding based on?
The understanding was based on when we would go up north, it was me, Dominic, and my sister, and we were allowed to carry the rifles around, and the officers over there said it was fine.
I'm going to move to strike as hearsay. What officers would have told
You
me.
asked the question on what the source of his knowledge was.
So you're telling us that the reason that you wanted Dominic to buy you an AR-15 as opposed to a pistol is the only reason was because you felt you couldn't lawfully possess a pistol?
Correct.
You didn't pick out the AR-15 for any other reason?
I thought it looked cool, but no.
You didn't pick it out because you wanted to go hunting with it, did you?
No.
You didn't pick it out because you were going to use it to protect your house, correct?
Correct.
You picked it out because it looked cool.
I thought it looked cool. Guess that's the reason, yes.
It resembled the types of weapons that are used in first-person shooter video games, correct?
I don't really play first-person shooter video games. I have, but I believe there's a variety of guns, including shotguns, pistols. There's guns in video games that resemble all guns.
Isn't it true when you would hang out with Dominic Black, you'd play Call of Duty and other first-person shooter video games?
Sometimes.
And those are games in which you use weapons like AR-15s to pretty much shoot anybody who comes at you, correct?
It's a video game where two players are playing together. I don't really understand the meaning of your question, to be honest.
Isn't one of the things people do in these video games try and kill everyone else with your guns?
Yeah, in the video game, it's just a video game, it's not real life.
As we can see, the defense used the video game offense, which was popularized in the 90s by a wackadoodle Florida lawyer named Jack Thompson. Now, for those of you who don't know who Jack Thompson was, he was a lawyer who was known for his role in attacking popular media for all of the world's crimes. All of them. Every last one of them. From rap to video games, that's why there's crime, folks. It's not their fault. It's those damn dirty video games. And of course, Dungeons & Dragons is a cult. Yeah, it didn't work for Jack Thompson back then, and I knew it wasn't going to work now, yet everyone was pissed because the prosecution was using video games as a way to show guilt that Rittenhouse was trying to be a character like that in Call of Duty. This softball offense, given to Rittenhouse, coupled by the overwhelming evidence and the terrible testimony from Grosskreutz, it was obvious there was only going to be one outcome. This is where I say hindsight is 20/20, but unlike most people, I didn't actually worry about whether or not Rittenhouse was going to be convicted. I'm not going to claim clairvoyance here, but I had faith in the justice system itself. It was designed around cases like these. It's built upon the principle that you are innocent until proven guilty. And I'd like to see our media take a lesson on this. I mean, it's wishful thinking, at least. I'm going to leave you with some final thoughts here. The reason I made this wasn't about the memes, though granted, they were pretty fucking funny. It's not about the sensationalism or inaccuracy from the media, but that would be a good enough reason. No, it's simply put, my personal line in the sand. You see, the line in the sand isn't that Kyle Rittenhouse should have been there, or that protesters have the right to protest. The line in the sand is simply put, don't attack our communities, and we won't have to defend ourselves. There's also another reason I wanted to make this video, and it goes more toward my character, and I want to wear my bias on my sleeve here. You see, I don't like the current news media as it is today. I think there needs to be fundamental changes so that integrity does not become a four-letter word to journalism. The problem, at least I think, is that the media seems to be politically entrenched on one side or another. And yes, I'm looking at both sides of this coin. It seems that they care more about their cause than they do the truth. And when that happens, well, you get Rittenhouse.
That white men had a particular kind of freedom and a particular kind of citizenship that only they have.
You're mad.
That gives, you know, from the slave catchers on, the right to inflict violence in the name of protecting property. That's like the foundational creation of the United States. So it would have been shocking. The real, I'm glad you mentioned the Derek Chauvin verdict.